And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers here every week, meeting interesting people and talking about topical issues. And this one's topical. It's a look at the economy now and what we've been through before.
Yes, we've entitled this, were the bad old days, the good old days. In other words, we're going to be looking at the Great Depression in the late 20s and early 30s in this country and seeing how it compares, if at all, to the current situation we're in and what kind of repair work was necessary then and would that work today, and try to get some ideas from two eminent economists who have studied this, written about it, and know it forwards and backwards.
Yeah, much conflicting information about the Great Depression and how government reacted and whether or not it was successful in diminishing the economic impact on our country. And we'll find out from two guys who know their stuff coming up next on The Verdict.
Every day America uses clean-burning natural gas instead of coal or oil is a day of victory for our environment. That's why Chesapeake chose to explore for natural gas exclusively, and we've never looked back. Because natural gas burns twice as clean as oil or coal, and reducing carbon emissions to combat potential global warming is every bit as urgent as cutting our dependence on energy imports. As America's #1 driller of new gas wells, Chesapeake is moving fast to find untapped reserves of natural gas here at home. It's the right fuel for America's economy and the fuel for a clean air future. We just happen to be early to see it so clearly. Chesapeake, natural gas wins the day.
Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate. We're accountants. We do taxes, business valuations, estate planning, and consulting. And we're right here in Oklahoma, working with the owners of small and medium-sized businesses. Steve Wilsey and Stuart Meyer have the resources and the experience. Wilsey, Meyer, Eatman, Tate in Oklahoma City and Tulsa.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce today's guests.
Today we're really pleased to have two eminent Oklahoma economists talking to us today about the Great Depression and the comparisons, if any, that we can make to our current economic situation. On my right across the table is Dr. Larkin Warner, economics professor emeritus at Oklahoma State University. He did his undergraduate work at Wesleyan University, his PhD at Indiana University. He first joined the faculty at Oklahoma State University in 1960, retired in 1998 in a manner of speaking. He's still very active after, frankly, an illustrious career. He assisted in the Maps for Kids project here in Oklahoma City. He has, in 2005, was inducted into the Oklahoma Higher Education Hall of Fame. This is his first visit to The Verdict. Welcome, Larkin. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
On my left is Dr. Frank Steinle. He is also a Regents OSU Professor Emeritus of Economics. He did his undergraduate work at DePaul, had his master's at the University of Illinois, and his PhD from Iowa University, joined the faculty at Oklahoma State in 1962, retiring in 2004. He worked and distinguished himself in many areas of economics. He is the author of Understanding Economic Recovery in the 1930s, published by the University of Michigan Press, one of the outstanding works about the Depression. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking to him about. And this is his first visit to The Verdict. Dr. Steindl, welcome.
Thank you.
The idea for this show basically came from all of the talk that we hear about how this current economic crisis is similar to the Great Depression and how government resolved the Great Depression with its action. And then debate began about whether or not government was successful in the 1930s, about whether or not this depression is similar to the depression of the 1930s. And we just thought, let's bring on a couple of guys who can shed more light than Kent and I could. So, Frank, let's go back to the beginning of the Great Depression. The catalyst appeared to be the stock market crash in 1929. Pick it up there, and from your view now, what happened?
In 17th century England,
Maybe I'm going to go back that far.
They noticed that the birth rate was rising at the same time that the population of storks was increasing. 1929, we had the Great Depression, and in October we had the stock market crash. So that's what the standard story is about. The difficulty with that point of view is that the Great Depression started in August, but the stock market crash took place at the end of October. So if anything, it was the economy that drove the stock market rather than vice versa. And another way to see why the stock market was not important in the Great Depression is that stock holdings were essentially individual owners in the Northeast. How many people in Oklahoma got burned by the stock market crash? The answer is essentially nobody. In October 1987, the stock market tanked one day, 23%, more than twice what happened in October of 1929. Everybody said, oh boy, we're in for it again. The effect on the economy was essentially zero. So the stock market as the one that caused the Great Depression, that is simply incorrect.
Okay, well, what did cause the Great Depression? What was the economic calamity about?
You have the standard business cycle, and the economy started turning down in August of 1929. The Federal Reserve got worried about things, and they turned the recession into the Great Depression by their adverse monetary policies. Who today would say, well, in a depression, you should shrink the money supply? The Federal Reserve did that by 33%. And so they're the ones who are principally responsible. And of course, you can say there are all kinds of other factors. Well, what about the expectations, and how do you measure that? But essentially, it was the Federal Reserve System that gave us the Great Depression.
Well, Larkin, in this current downturn that we're in, whether we call it a depression or recession or whatever label we attach to it, what has been government's reaction insofar as the money supply is concerned?
Well, it's to say that it's gone up is an understatement, isn't it, Frank?
It surely is.
It's a matter of concern, I think, as we think 2-3 years down the pike, that we may be faced with some pretty significant inflationary pressure. So there's been no lack of liquidity, has there, Frank?
That's true. In the Great Depression, the banking crisis, which began in 1930, here with the banks failing, the problem was liquidity. Banks didn't have sufficient funds to pay the depositors. That is not the problem today. The problem today is the bank's capital, the solvency is the issue. And so throwing all the money at the banks does not help the economy other than if the money went in to the capital.
Because we haven't found a bottom. Until real estate finds a bottom,
well,
then is that the issue?
That's the subprime mortgages, real estate is certainly a major factor in it. And how you're going to deal with that, they're still groping. It's, today we got one solution and tomorrow there'll be another one.
Larkin, is there agreement on when the Depression of the 30s ended? Or what's your view about it?
We can argue over that. Perhaps it's reasonable to argue that it ended in 1933, in the sense that every year after 1933, except 38, I guess it was. 37, 38, GDP grew. Output was growing. Now, we didn't get back to where we were, but there was a recovery going on after 1933. So to some extent, it's reasonable to make that argument.
Well, what did government do, if anything, to turn it around in the 30s?
Well,
If they shrunk the money supply, that wasn't the right thing to do.
That's
but
correct.
Did they do something that was right?
certainly the New Deal played a role. It's interesting the way there's a lot of argument these days, increasing argument, that the New Deal policies actually retarded recovery rather than promoted it. And the truth to tell, the motivation behind a bunch of the New Deal policies really they weren't aimed at recovery. They had other agendas. Just like today, you know, we're talking about the Obama administration having a bunch of other agendas
right.
besides recovery. You know, there's just an argument over whether these New Deal policies worked. If you're an ardent New Dealer, you'll say, boy, they saved us. If you're a little more skeptical about things, you'll say, yeah, I don't know
Well, Frank, what's your view? Did the government fix in the 1930s work?
No.
Well, then what caused it to change?
It was productivity increase. The 1930s, after 1933, saw the biggest productivity surge in the history of the United States. And unfortunately, we don't know what causes productivity to go up. We can talk about importance of education and dedicate, but that's what got us out of it here. The New Deal policies exacerbated things because they pushed up prices so that people couldn't buy as much, but they thought that higher prices would give firms more profit. They pushed up wages through unionization, Wagner Act, and all that sort of thing, because that way they thought people would have more funds to spend. Both prices and wages went above what normal market clearing should be. And that's what caused the Depression to go on and on. Finally, it was productivity. And this is most clearly seen in the recovery from the 37-38 recession, because normally prices and output tend to move together. After 1938, at the bottom of it, output rebounded robustly, but prices fell for 2.5 years, 2.25 years. And
Let me jump in and get us to a break, and we'll pick
Okay.
it up right there. We're discussing the Depression in the 1930s, its correlation, and government's action or inaction, and the effect on the verdict.
I'm Mike Larson. I'm an artist, and I am Chickasaw. We were fortunate enough to start doing more and more work with the Chickasaws, largely because of Bill Attertubby. We developed, with his help and with his graces, a series of paintings on the Chickasaw elders. I would interview them, I would do sketches, we would talk about their history, some of it phenomenal, and then we would come away from that, go home, and I would do paintings. First thing I will look at when I look at a person is their eyes. You look at their eyes, you look at their hands, you can tell everything you need to about a person. These people portrayed to me strength and character, filled with an integrity and a joy of life. The wonderful thing about it, aside from the paintings, is the way that it brought me back into the Chickasaw family. It has made me more Chickasaw. It has made me more Chickasaw than I ever thought I could be.
Home values are down in some states, but not in Oklahoma. Oklahoma's home values have increased 4.2% during the past 12 months. Unlike some states where home values have decreased as much as 20%. Good thing you're in Oklahoma. There may be real estate problems in some states, but there has never been a better time than now to buy or sell a home in Oklahoma. One of the most affordable states in the country, Oklahomans are buying and selling homes every day, and an Oklahoma realtor can show you how. Good thing you're in Oklahoma.
Okiwani is an Indian name for a place where children play. When we obtained the camp, we found a lot of oil debris left in the woods. We saw a commercial about how the oil and natural gas industry cleans up old oil well sites. We called the OERB and they agreed to remove tons of concrete and steel. It didn't cost us a thing. Thousands of children have left their footprints on this land. Thanks to the oil and gas industry, they will for a long time to come.
we are back on The Verdict discussing today's economy and the economy in the 1930s. And Frank Steinle and Larkin Warner are our guests. And Frank, when we left, you were making a point about the 1930s and what brought us out of the Depression.
Yes, it was productivity because of the tremendous productivity surge. And this is most clearly seen in the recovery from the 37-38 recession, which lasted just 1 year, because surprisingly, prices didn't go up during that recovery. In fact, they fell for 2.25 years, but the economy just boomed. And if you look at the long-run trend of the economy from 1869 to the present time, you say, well, when did the U.S. economy get back to its trend line of output? And the answer is 1941. So World War II did not end the Great Depression. It had ended before World War II, at least from the point of view of the United States.
What's your comments on the war and the timing of that?
Certainly, the economy boomed in a sense during World War II. In fact, half of all production was for the military at the peak of that period. But remember that, and of course we had to fight World War II, but the fact of the matter is more military goods didn't really make people better off. Didn't make consumers better off.
Quality of life didn't improve. The standard of living didn't necessarily improve.
That awaited the post-war period.
Well,
The boom.
World War II did generate employment in the sense that we use the term jobless recovery. That was certainly true in the 1930s in the sense that in 1940 we still had 14.5% unemployment, but the economy was back to full, and then of course with the war people got employed. But that was a kind of a funny thing because the unemployment rate went to 1%. But that's sort of like saying slavery is the way to go because we threw so many people in the military at low wages. Again, the war here, so forth. So that it is sense of getting back to normality, it was 1946.
Larkin, the New Deal and its policies and projects was allegedly aimed at bringing us out of the Depression. Were there other objectives that the Roosevelt administration had for its New Deal besides simply the economy? Well,
there was little doubt that there was concern over income redistribution. Certainly the raising of the marginal income tax rate in 35 to something like 79%. That was consistent with that. But there was a great interest in redistributing income to workers, hence the support of the development of labor unions, and redistributing income from the urban areas to the rural areas, hence the farm policies, many of which are still in place today.
Can we focus on that just a little bit, the farm policies? We hear the president now talking about doing away with entitlements and farm subsidies. Are these the same farm subsidies you're talking about that were created in the 30s?
The same principles. The supporting of prices above a norm, above an equilibrium level. In the 30s, there were some aspects to the new farm policies that were quite deleterious to poor folks who were living in rural areas. And remember, about 40% of Oklahoma's population in those days lived on the farm.
Yeah.
And but a lot of them were sharecroppers. And one of the things that the New Deal farm policies did was, by adopting programs to restrict output, caused farm operators to take land out of production, and the land they took out of production was the land that they had been allowing the sharecroppers to operate on. So a lot of sharecroppers were forced off the farm during that period.
What about the governors in the 1930s in Oklahoma?
Oh, that was a hoot. The three main governors were Alfalfa Bill Murray, E.W. Marland, and Red Phillips. And Murray, of course, was quite a character, but he ended up having no use at all for the New Deal. And when the New Deal policies came down, like the Federal Emergency Relief Act came down to through the state of Oklahoma why Murray wanted to control the whole thing, didn't want to do any of the things that the New Deal wanted done. And we were, I guess, the only state where these New Deal programs were totally federalized, so that when the money came down to Oklahoma, it was handed out by federal employees rather than flowing through state employees that were all beholden to Alfalfa Bill Murray. Then we had a complete reversal when E.W. Marland came in. He had founded, he was the originator of what became Conoco, and he ran on the platform of a little New Deal for Oklahoma. So he was very much sympathetic with New Deal. Then in the late 30s, we get Red Phillips, who's an arch conservative and has no use. I mean, he didn't want the federal government to build Denison Dam or the Grand River. I mean, we wouldn't have the Grand Lake or Lake Texoma if he had had his way. So we had some real characters in there as in the government, and it's interesting to see how differently governors are reacting today to the stimulus program.
It is. A couple of minutes left and time is slipping away. What lessons can and should be learned from what happened in the 1930s as we face the issues we face today, Frank?
Well, there's a very, very nice acronym, MAFA, MAFA, and it stands for Mistaking Activity for Achievement. And what it represents is what we see happening all the time. We got to do something.
Right.
And instead of taking time to say, what is the problem, and let's work it out. And what we see today is just a classic MAFA case. Lots of activity, and it's doubtful that we're going to see much achievement out of it. And so I'm not saying we ought to steady it, but we ought to get a good fix. We ought to get a satisfactory fix on what's going on. The homeowners situation. Every day, virtually, there's another program on how to deal with them. In other words, nobody's thought it through.
Yeah. It's ready, fire, aim policy.
Right.
What would you do, Warner, at Larkin, if they were listening, and they very well might be? What would your advice be to the people in Washington who are making policy decisions?
Well, I think, and Frank certainly would verify this, getting the financial sector in order and having an effective monetary policy is first. Secondly, I think we need to go a lot slower with respect to these various domestic programs. We really, as economists, we look at, and we say, well, what we ought to be doing is looking at the benefits and the costs of expanding various programs. We ought to be looking at them carefully. We are not. We are not doing that. And finally, of course, there's concern over the extent to which we're building up a national debt that we can't.
One other thing is...
We've got about 10 seconds. If you
one
want
other thing, we should cut marginal tax rates, because that way people will have more disposable income right now, which they can spend, rather than waiting for the government spending to finally work its way through.
I wish we're out of time, but we are. Thank you both for coming on, Frank and Larkin.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Kent and I'll have a final word right after this.
It's time to meet the new people in power.
The people responsible for our energy future.
It's you.
It's me. All of us together.
From now on, we're the people in power.
OG&E will supply the power.
It's how we apply the power that counts.
We've got to use electricity smarter,
Wiser.
cleaner,
Better.
So we've got to be informed,
Equipped.
prepared.
committed.
From now on.
Look, nobody wants to waste energy.
Nobody wants to build new power plants.
Nobody wants to pay more for electricity.
But nobody wants to give up their way of life.
We don't have to.
If we just use positive energy together.
I'll take advantage of off-peak hours.
That means cutting energy use from 1 to 7 every day.
Every day.
I'm going to sign up for more and more wind power.
We'll take advantage of the high-tech tools coming soon from OG&E.
OG&E can't do it alone.
It's you and OG&E working together.
Find dozens of ways you can help at OGE.com.
A positive energy future is in our power. Together.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, Each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
We're back. One of our guests, Frank Steinle, has written a book, Understanding Economic Recovery in the 1930s. It's by the University of Michigan Press. Recommend that to those who are interested in the subject?
Yeah, we appreciate these two well-educated and well-experienced economists coming on and telling us about the comparisons that are applicable and those that are not between the 30s and now. I think it helps all of us. It certainly helped me understand kind of where we are and what to be looking for.
Absolutely. I think everyone learned something today. I want to take you to our website, theverdict.tv. Tell us about a show you'd like to see right here on The Verdict. We'll see you next time.
The preceding program was produced exclusively for the Cox Channel.